We're going to talk about planting fruit trees. In the information you get later on, you will get a handout on how to plant trees in Galveston County. It's interesting. So, okay. When you buy and plant a tree, you have a vision, a dream. The man who builds a bridge puts his name on the side of it, and someday the bridge will come down. When you plant a pecan tree, it has the potential to be there for about 300 years. But we want to plant it right to begin with. Okay. What does it take to make your dream come true? We need a plan, okay? And we're going to try to cover that, and we're going to get into a few things before planting the tree, like selection and variety and things like that. I actually suggest that you do your homework. A lot of people wake up one day and they decide they're going to go buy a tree and then they're going to plant it. Well, do they have a place for it? When you decide what type you want, you need to take into consideration the variety that you want, one that produces fruit or whatever that you want. You may only want trees, just colored foliage, okay? We all want to take into consideration the rootstock that's in the soil, because some rootstock does well in heavy soil and different pH soils. What is the expected tree size that this particular tree is going to grow? How tall? How wide? What kind of spacing are you going to use? Because you don't want to have to trim it just to be able to mow around it or whatever. When it comes to location, we want full sunlight and we want airflow. The reason we want airflow is because that good airflow, especially early in the morning, removes some of that moisture, and moisture ends up basically feeding or creating fungus, and fungus is a big problem in Galveston County. We want to look at the overhead lines. Peach tree under overhead lines might be okay, but not pecan trees. We want to take into consideration the slabs. How close to those slabs are you going to plant your tree? And what kind of root competition will your tree have with other trees in the area? When it comes to the word drainage, I've done programs before and people tell me that when I did the program, drainage is all I talked about. Drainage is one of the most important things out there. Roots setting in excess water cannot breathe. It's like us. We have to breathe. Okay. The guidelines for planting fruit trees do seem to change from time to time. And where you purchase your trees, the people giving you advice may or may not know what they're really talking about. So you really need to get your information from a good source or your own experience. The things we're really going to cover today is root inspection, root pruning, planting your tree, and top reduction. And we're going to do that for a reason. When to buy your tree. Some of this is my own preference opinions, but I've been successful with it. I like bare root trees. I like to receive them, say, mid-December, January, and even into early February. And when I get it, I'm going to plant it as soon as I can. I'm going to be ready for it when it comes. If you have to, and you set it in the garage and it come bare root from a nursery, make sure you keep the roots moist and keep it in the shade. If it is container grown, you're also going to keep it in that shade. But one disadvantage you have is the ants like to get in places that are up out of the water. So you need to be cautious or aware of ants in that root system. Now, some of us go out here and we're going shopping in July and there's trees on sale and they're cheap. So we buy them. But remember this, that tree has to be watered and taken care of till sometime in the winter when you get ready to plant that tree. Okay, I'm going to mention citrus a little bit here, and the most important thing is the Mexican lime is the most tender. That's the one it needs to be in the garage when it freezes. The three on the bottom can tolerate temperatures, I know, down as low as about 22 degrees. 3 years ago at my house, the satsuma and the orange grafted on trifoliata did not lose any leaves. Everything was great. The Meyer lemon was defoliated, and within a week it came back. Now on the right, I want to mention the Seville sour orange. This is the tree that you see in people's backyards. And when these oranges fall to the ground, nobody picks them up. That is a rootstock that's used in the valley because they have high salinity or high salt in their soil, but it has no cold tolerance either. The trifoliata and flying dragon is what we use quite often in our area. It has cold hardiness. They actually go semi-dormant in the winter and will defoliate if they're sitting there by themselves. But they also give you the orange or whatever's on top of it, the opportunity to withstand those lower temperatures. Now, the Carrizo and the Swindle are hybrids of the trifoliata, and that's what a lot of citrus is grafted on now. One of the reasons they grafted on those two is because that tree grows very, very fast. Now, if you have citrus seeds that are planted and they're growing well, they can be grafted, but you may not have any cold tolerance because of the root that your citrus is growing on top of. When it comes to deciduous trees, that's the one that lose their leaves in the winter and go dormant. We're going to mention chill hours. In our area, we normally recommend that you plant trees that are in a range of about 300 hours of chill, plus or minus 100. If you're in eastern part of Texas City, you definitely want under 200 hours, or Galveston Island or Bolivar. You definitely want those low chill hours. When it comes to the rootstock of peach, the Nemagard, the Guardian, and the Florida Guard are three good Nemagard resistant varieties for our area. When you get into West Texas, you want a different variety or a different rootstock. When it comes to pecans, any pecan growing in the right place is a candidate to be grafted. You can actually plant seeds. As soon as those little seeds fall in the fall, lay them on and kind of step on them gently, cover them with a little bit of hay, they will sprout, and there's your rootstock. You can also use the American persimmon that grows locally as a rootstock for your persimmons. When it comes to pears, normally we use the Pyrus caloriana as a rootstock that does well in heavy soil. If you want to dwarf your pears, you graft them on quince, C, A, or BA29, and they work real well. When it comes to apples, this is the one that you need to do your homework on because different rootstocks are going to produce different sizes, and some of these rootstocks will produce a tree that cannot support its limbs, and the limbs are tied on a piece of wire. Okay. Chilling requirement. This is for those deciduous trees that lose their leaves in the winter, and some trees need different chill hours. So chill hours requirement is the requirement of plants for a specific period of dormancy below a particular temperature in order for them to initiate flowering. Now, give me a minute. Chill hours, collectively, it's the hours between 32 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, what that means is in the winter when your trees goes dormant and that peach, plum, or whatever, if it requires 200 hours of chill, when that temperature drops below 45 but above 32, that bud almost has like an adding machine in there and a thermometer, and it starts adding up the number of hours of chill that it has. When that variety that requires 200 hours of chill gets that 200 hours, it now wants to start blooming. Now, let me go a little further on this. The 800-hour chill in Dallas, if you bring it down here and plant it, it's not going to get that 800 hours of chill except maybe 1 out of 10 years. But normally what will happen, it will try to bloom. You'll have almost no foliage, and you'll say there's something wrong with your tree. It's not getting the chill hours that it needs. Now, the 200-hour chill peach that we have here that does very well in the winter, if we take it to Dallas, in October, November, it will have its chill hours and it will start to try to bloom and then the frost or freeze will kill everything that comes out. This is the one thing that almost everyone needs to know, but not everybody knows this. We always talk about location, location, location. That's what the realtors say. Now, photo on the left, November the 19th, the tree looks great. A lot of fruit on it. You can tell how tall the people are. They're waiting for the son to come home from college to harvest the fruit. In February, the same tree, almost from the same location, the top has been burnt by extremely cold temperatures. Now look on the left, and you see that tree is on the south side of the house. That's location, location, location. Here again, we're going to talk about drainage. We got surface water. That's the water that you can see that as soon as everything drains out, you can see the grass again. Now, what we're going to talk about is the internal, the water that's still in the soil when all that water runs off. How long is it going to take for it to be gone? It needs to percolate away from your roots. In gumbo, it will take a long time. Loam, not quite as long. In sand, it can be pretty quick. In Galveston, where they have sand, it drains internally very well, very quick. So, ideal soil is 50% solids, about 25% air, and about 25% water. That's what that tree or your vegetables and things would like to have. They have to breathe. Now, when it comes to buying your bare root trees from a nursery, normally they ship them in a bundle and the roots are moist and they have something there to retain that moisture. This photo is 2 pecan trees that are fixing to be planted at my daughter's house. The one on the left has 2 tap roots. One of those are going to be cut off. The one closest to the arrow is probably the one that's going to be left, and then it will be planted. Once this tree is planted, the top will be reduced by 1/2. On pecan trees, A&M recommends you cut 1/3 of the top off. Now, the pecan grower who's paid for this tree and has to pay to replace it is going to cut half the top off because he doesn't want to do this again. The recommendation on distancing or the spacing of pecan trees is 30 to 50 feet. I planted some at 50 feet centers before, and what I realized or wished, I wish I would have done it on 60-foot centers because these trees are getting very large. The first pecan trees I planted were 1976. The instructions were a large hole, 3.5 foot in diameter, 18 inches deep. Then you take the post hole digger and go down as deep as you could. Well, I did that. Then I filled it full of peat, the post hole digger hole. I drove a stake in the ground, tied the tree to it, backfilled it, and it's done very well. That's the way the instructions used to be. Now you dig a hole only large enough to accommodate the roots and backfill it. Now, I didn't realize the importance of this tree until one day I'm out back and it's hot. I'd like to have some shade, and I walked underneath the shade of this tree. Then I realized how important it was. Okay. Now the thing here is that large hole. I didn't have to dig that large hole. I could have saved a lot of time. Now, when you purchase your bare root from a nursery, if you need to, you can heel them in, which means you lay them at an angle in the ground and temporarily put some sand or something over them to keep the roots moist. Okay. I also recommend that you keep some records of what you're doing and digital photographs, because I sometimes have to go back to some of these digital photographs just to find out when something happened. Bare root deciduous planting. Okay. I like to plant December, January, and early February. I like bare root trees. I want them dormant. with no green showing on top. I do not want any hair roots because those hair roots, the white hair roots, normally start growing before the green shows up on top. I want the minimum size hole for those roots. If I have one long or exceptionally long root, I will cut part of it off. Ideally, I will tell you to fill the hole with water, insert the root system, and backfill with the same soil in reverse order. So that means the soil that came out last goes back in first. We do not want any fertilizer in or around this tree at this time because fertilizer is normally acidic, and we don't want to burn the roots of our tree when the hair roots first come out. Once we get that tree in there, we want to water. We want to remove all the air pockets, which means we're going to use our hand to vibrate and make sure that there are no hair roots or there's no air pockets in that hole. There have been times when I've seen people plant these trees and there are clods going back in the hole. And it just so happened they had sand. Sand was added to the hole, washed in with water so that there were no air pockets. Once your tree is planted, pat yourself on the back. Now, let's cut part of the top off. The con trees, we're going to cut half. Plums, peaches, and some of these others, we're going to be more extreme than that. This is the tree that was grown in my garden, and it is a Nemagard rootstock. I grafted it, and now it's going to another orchard. It's going to a master gardener orchard in the southern part of Houston. But what I want to show you is that's a good root system. It's going into that plastic bag. I put a little mulch in there to keep it moist. And on the way up, I do not want this laying in the sun because the sun might burn the roots. And those roots are valuable. I want to protect them. So this is the tree, and it's getting ready to be planted. And I want to show you some things. The bottom arrow is about the same location that we're going to put this in the soil. So from there down, we'll probably never see again. About 6 to 8 inches above that is an arrow, and that is where the graft union is. And this is important. When you look at the roots, they're very evenly good distribution, and that's good. What that means, if I would have left this tree where it was, it would have been very well anchored, and no wind would ever blow it over. Now, one of the questions I'll ask you is, where are the rest of the roots from this tree? They're in my garden. Now, when we get ready to plant this, if we have broken roots or ends that are very rough and ragged, we may trim those just a little bit so that we get a smooth end. Now, this went up to that other garden. And whose hole are we going to use? Are we going to use that big, expensive hole? Or are we going to use a hole that's large enough to accommodate the roots? Well, they're not ready totally. So we built a volcano out of good soil, pressed it down some, and dug a hole in the top. And we're going to plant this tree right there. We have drainage because their intention is a raised bed. This is a volcano or a mound. This only gives us some time to fill in the rest of the bed. Now, if you're doing this out in the open somewhere out in the field and you dig this hole and it's wet, if there are slick sides on the side of that hole, you want to use something to rough it up, because what we don't want is we don't want that root going to the edge of the hole, hitting that slick surface and turning and going in the wrong direction. We want it to continue going out away from the trunk of the tree. Okay. Water in the hole. Well, so, sometimes that's difficult to do and we may not be able to do it. We can, we will. Now, we're going to trim the roots if necessary. We're going to plant at the right depth. We're going to backfill, last out, first in. We're going to use our hands to manipulate this soil around here like a vibrator because you don't want any air pockets around those roots. If we have clods, we're going to use sand or something to fill it in. Now, on some of your fruit trees, if they're planted too deep or too shallow, that may have an impact, according to A&M, on the yield of your tree, and we want everything we can get out of that tree. Now, we need to balance with the top because, you know, part of the roots are still in my garden. So when we were selling bare root trees, we used to tell these people that you cut $15 off the top of your $25 tree. And people bought. They just cannot believe that we're recommending that. Most people who buy their trees elsewhere, they won't prune the tops. A year or two later, once they learn, they're now willing to do it. So if you look to the right of that tree sitting in that mound, that's the top that came off of it. And it's a lot of tree. So we have to balance. If the top of that tree demands more than the root system can supply, it may die. Bare root trees, not pruning back the tree at planting is perhaps the greatest cause of tree failure. Here again, the pecan grower cuts half the tree back. I know a man locally that was going to plant a lot of pecan trees. And the one thing I told him, when you plant them, cut half the top back. Well, he bought over 20 trees, planted them. Next year, he's having to buy more trees because he didn't cut the top back on any of them. We have to balance the top with the root system. Here again, how much is the top going to demand from those roots, and can those roots supply that? I want to prepare you for a shock now because there's a book out there called The New Horticulturalist by Henry M. Stringfellow that I've read before, and I like it. The man had an orchard in Hitchcock, Texas. It's called Stringfellow Orchard. And at Highway 6, if you're on 519 facing south, if you look to the right, kind of in the back, you'll see this large house, and that's his old homestead. Now, on this, I'm going to tell you this. I will not tell you to do this, but I will show you what I have done, and you can make your own decisions. This is going to prepare you so that you can get out of the comfort zone that many people have because they don't want to prune roots and trees. Okay. At a Master Gardener's sale, we had 8 peach trees left, and they were mulched in a container. They're going to be thrown away or something. They're at the end of their lifespan because nobody's going to take care of them, but I want these trees. This tree is a peach, and it's a whip because it's long, tall. It's bare root. It's bloomed and leafed out. Today is the 28th of February, 2016. This is totally out of my comfort zone. I never planted a tree like this before. I normally buy that bare root from a nursery and no leaves are out. So we're going to take this tree right here and we're going to plant it, but we're going to do it a little different. We're going to do it the Stringfellow way. So this is the root system. If you look at it, there's a taproot there. That means this thing was grown from seed. Okay, this is before the pruning. Now, one thing I would do here is I know I'm going to cut a lot of the top off. So somewhere above this root system, I'm going to cut this tree off about 2 feet high because I want to be able to handle it. I don't want all that extra top flopping around. Okay. So now let's go to the next slide here and look. And remember this. This is before the pruning. This is after the pruning. This looks like a carrot. All of the side roots have been removed, and some of them are, you probably have a nub out there, a 1/4 of an inch, something like that. And we're going to plant this. Now, how big a hole do we need? I've seen and used, take a rebar, stick in the ground, wallow a hole out, stick that carrot in the hole, Now I need to backfill it and make sure there's no air pockets. And it works. Now, let me go back. This is what we started with. And this is what we now have. And I'm going to plant this. I planted on the 28th of February, and on the 24th of May. This is that tree right here. It's got good loose soil. This bed is 1 foot high. The fence is 6 foot high. And this was trimmed probably about 12 inches from the soil. So this tree has grown at least 4 foot in that several months. Now over here, these trees were from the same batch of trees. The bottom or the root system were only pruned if needed, and then they were planted. Of course, the top was cut back to at least 18 inches tall. Now, there was a locally guy that was going to plant 100 peach trees. He had his rows built up for drainage. It's muddy. Him and his son are planting them in the gumbo. And what happens in the gumbo like that, you don't get all your roots going down. You've got air pockets, and it's hard to do this. Okay. I had already talked to him about planting carrots, or planting them like carrots. When I got there, he was ready to do it. So half of the trees were planted like carrots. Now, I follow and I go back to this nursery occasionally and I look at those trees. The trees that have been planted like these carrots are very well anchored in the soil because they have a very good distribution of roots. The one that were mudded in, quite a few of them, when I shake that tree, you can tell it's not anchored very well, and someday with a high wind, it may be laying on the ground. And that's what we don't want to happen. Now, this is that tree that we planted up at that Master Gardener garden. It was planted like a carrot. It was grafted about here, the same day that it was planted, and this is the day it was dug up. There's a very good, even distribution of roots there. I like it, you know. And we don't want that tree to blow over. Now, this is an apple tree. I can tell you that it was probably taken out of the pot, put right down on the ground and backfilled. The roots failed. This is kind of like a funeral. The guys are standing there, their heads are bowed. This is the one thing we don't want to happen to our trees. It's horrible. So we want a very good root system under our trees. Remember, we want that pecan tree that we plant to be here 300 years from now. So our great-great-great-grandchildren are sitting under it, and of course, they'll never ask who planted this tree. Okay, now, the same day, February the 28th, I am going to do something out of my comfort zone, but I know what to expect. When the nursery, the year before this right here, the nursery got these grafted peach trees from California, and they're going to put it in that pot and they're going to grow it for a year. And the people that are putting them in the pot trim a little of the taproot off, trim some of the sides off, put it in the pot, backfill it with some kind of soil mixture or some media. They're going to set it in a row. They're going to trim a little bit off the top. And they're going to water and take care of it. And then next year, they're going to offer it to us to sale, for sale. Okay. So here I cut it open. You can see where it's root bound. The roots are coming up around the side. Many people will take it out of there, put it right in the ground. And it probably won't anchor well, and they're not going to cut the top either. So this tree has the potential of blowing over. Now, I washed all the soil off this roots, and this is what the roots look like later on. Some of these that I have had the opportunity to plant at other places, some of these were crammed into that pot. The roots were broken, not cut. And in one occasion, planting one of these elsewhere, the damage to the tree was so bad we wouldn't even plant it. Now, these, I'm going to take all the hair roots out. I'm going to trim those roots. I'm going to plant it. Then I'm going to show you what happened to it. Now, when I did this, I'm out of my comfort zone, and I did not prune the roots as heavy as I felt like I should have. But here again, I'm afraid. So we plant the tree, 24th of May. This is what the tree looks like. It's approximately 2 feet tall. The one on the right is the carrot. Now, there is a persimmon tree that gives it some morning shade. And how much the competition is around here, I don't think it was that bad. But to this day, I feel like I should have pruned it more. Okay, now, as many of us come to the extension office, we used to pass by this place, and this tree was in the front yard. There were several of them like that. And apparently, they didn't want to plant it. They didn't know how to. I don't even know if the bottom's taken out of this pot. But they didn't cut the top off either. And this person knows better. Now, what the problem is that I see is there's a master gardener that I've been in her backyard, and I've planted trees with her and helped her and stuff like that. I drive by her house one day and I look back over my shoulder and I see in the back of her yard, I see this right here growing. Now, how did this master gardener learn how to plant trees like this? Where did she learn it from? Well, she drives by this place pretty regular. So what I want to say here is some of the public is misinformed. They're always looking for new ways to do things. Now, the ultimate goal of the Galveston County Master Gardeners is to educate the public. But there are also other people that we need to educate, a lot of people, okay? Now, this tree is in Hitchcock, or was. It's in the edge of a garden. It's got fairly good drainage, but let's look at the age of this tree. This peach tree is probably about 3 years old. Would you replant it? Well, let's do it. We're going to walk through it. Now, if you shake this tree, you're going to find out that it's not anchored well, and the bark from here up is gray. I don't like to deal with gray bark, and I'm going to explain it to you. In order to transplant this tree, I would first of all cut it off about 18 inches high and get this trash out of the way. I would dig it up. I like a tapered round point sharpshooter with a long handle, and I'm going to cut probably about 6 inches or 8 inches away from the tree, and then I'm going to pull it up. I'm going to wash all the soil off the roots. We're going to look at it, and then we're going to see what's happened. Then we're going to trim something. How much? I don't know. But we're going to trim it after we look at it. We're then going to replant it, and we're going to be careful about how deep that we plant this tree. Now, and we're going to water it, and we're going to make sure there's no air pockets there. But now we need to do some follow-up. Now, we want some buds to come out of that gray wood so we can make an inverted umbrella. So we need probably 3 to 6 limbs coming out in all directions. From the gray wood, that's difficult at times. So what we're going to do is we're going to hope that one bud will come out above the graft and start upward. Then we're going to do whatever it takes without breaking it off to get it to continue almost straight up. Then when it gets to be about 12 inches tall, and that's the only one we have, we're going to now take our fingernail and tip it. We're going to take the very top out of it so that it quits growing straight up. And then we're going to develop or create our scaffold limbs. But the gray bark is a problem. Now, a lot of times when people buy peach trees elsewhere, some of these, if it's not bare root, this can be gray bark. And this can be one of the biggest challenges that you have when it comes to stone fruit. Okay, we're going to get into citrus. When you buy citrus, it needs to have a tag on it. It needs to be a Texas Department of Agricultural tag telling you, it'll have a number on it, and it'll probably tell you who produced it. When it comes to transporting citrus, you cannot bring it from outside of the state of Texas into Texas because we're under quarantine. We're also under quarantine when it comes to some counties. There's a couple of counties in the valley that you cannot transport citrus out of. You cannot transport citrus out of the quarantine counties like Montgomery County, Harris County, Galveston County, and Fort Bend County. But if you buy in those 4 counties, you can transport it around in those counties, but you cannot take it out of those counties. Beaumont, that is not in the quarantine, you can buy your citrus there and bring it into Galveston County or these 4 counties, but you cannot take it back out now. Now, on this particular plant right here, if you look on the right here, this tree growing right here, if you look at the leaves, this is probably a hybrid of a trifoliata, which is a good rootstock. It is container grown, and we know it's root bound. So what are we going to do about it? Well, we're going to look at that too. Now, this is what most of us purchase. It's in a container. If I were to purchase this, or most people, plant it, you purchase it in the spring, you're going to plant it. You get it in midsummer, it's cheap, but you got to water it sometimes twice a day. So this is what we're going to purchase, and we're going to talk about planting this tree. Now, if you were going to plant this tree like this, the minimum that should be done is you take a good sharp box cutter, knife or whatever, and on the sides, and at least 4 and maybe more places, you want to cut those roots that are going in circles because this tree is root bound. What you want to do is give it an opportunity to produce roots so that it will anchor well. I would raise it a little higher so this soil right here is just above the natural soil line. I'm going to plant it, backfill, try to get all the air pockets out of there if I can. I'm going to water as needed. Now, because I have trimmed the roots some, I will also trim the back some. I want to balance the top and the bottom. Here again, if the top demands more than the roots can supply, you have a problem. Now, if I were to cut this on 6 sides, I would probably cut back about half the top. Not half of the leaves, but I would cut some limbs so that I knew I had 50% of the top cut back. And if you want to cut it back more, it's not going to hurt it. This little orange tree was doing very good, and I would drive by it almost every day. And then one day it starts to fail. I know the lady, I got to talk to her. I look at the tree, the weed eater has killed it. There's nothing to turn back on this one. I discussed this with her husband and I said, well, who mows your yard? He proudly says, I do. And then I told him what happened to his tree. But I also request the root system if the tree's dug up. So this is the root system. This was planted from a pot with a small hole and put in the ground. Now, my question is, where's the taproot? We see roots going around roots, and someday they may girdle. And this is probably the answer why some citrus trees grow a certain period of time and then they reduce production. Could it be that the roots are girdling or strangling the tree? But I want you to remember the weed eater, there was a joke about when you sold 100 trees to a guy, you'd give him a weed eater so he'd come back next year. Okay. Now, this is citrus, trifoliata, grown in a pot. The roots went to the bottom and made circles. The one on the right, the taproot has been trimmed. And if you look over here on the right, see that little limb going, root going straight out? I would take most of their hair roots off and leave it. I want something going straight out and away. In those containers, what happens a lot of time, the taproot will grow down, hit the bottom, and go anywhere. The ones that grow to the edge of the pot will turn, but they quit going outward. Now, this is the trifoliata in a pipe. This pipe is about 6 inches diameter, I have a plastic sleeve in it, and it is open at the ground level. There's a stake, and it's wired to the stake. This is to support, because I'm going to plant 3 trifoliata seeds in that sleeve on or about the 7th of April of 14. A year later in January, I'm going to dig it up. I'm going to slide all that stuff out, and I'm going to look at the roots. This ruler here, and if you look, most of the roots are about 18 inches long. Of course, some of those hair roots probably went quite a bit deeper, but I didn't get those. But if you look at the top, they're about 18 inches plus. So if you start that seed in a pot that's 8 inches deep, it won't be long, the taproot will be hitting the bottom and turning. Now, this is a Caracara orange, and I'm going to plant it, but I'm going to take all the soil off the roots. Now, right about here, there is a couple of buds that are just coming out, and I can tell that's fresh new buds coming out. So what I do is I drop this in the water, take this out of the pot, wash all the soil off of it, trim the roots, top's cut off here, and I plant it. Same day, and it's now in the ground. In April, I go back and I take a photograph, and see those buds I told you were coming out? They've grown probably at least a foot or more. And in October the 3rd of 19, same year, this is what the top looks like. The roots are developing. This tree's getting ready to really grow. Now, these 2 trees right here, they got some age on them. But the next 4 slides deal with these 2 trees. If you have to look at the height of this tree, when those people, they planted a seed in that pot, it grew, they grafted it, they fertilized it, and the rootstock is going to make this tree grow very fast, because they know that beauty sells. And when you walk out there in that nursery and you see these, whether you need one or not, you're going to buy one. Then you're going to take it home, and where do I plant it at? But anyhow, you're going to buy it, and that's what they want. This tree's root bound. So we're going to wash all the soil off the roots. We're going to prune the root system, cut the top back, and then we're going to plant it. But the first thing that I'm going to do so I can handle it is I'm going to cut most of the top off. Now, this is what the root system looks like. Now we're going to wash all of the soil off, and we're going to trim off most of those hair roots. And when you're doing this, it's a job because those roots are pretty tight. Now, when we got through, this is what they look like. Now, what happens is when these roots grow to the edge of the pot, I'm going to trim those off. Okay. Let me go back 1 slide here. Look at something. Okay, no. Now, when we planted it, we pruned the top, I think I left about 6 or 8 leaves on top. Here again, I don't want the top to demand more than the roots can supply. And it works. I've done this in some other master gardeners' backyards and followed them up over a period of time, and they did very well. Haven't lost any yet. Now, this is an Auer in a small container. And if you look right here, here's the graft right here. Here's the trunk of the tree. And then right here where this little dog leg is, that's the graft. It was put on as a T-bud. Now, this is what it looked like. Now I've washed all the soil or the media off of that root system. I'll lay it down on the soil and I'll look at it again. Now, you see this root growing over here to the left where it made that elbow? I'm going to cut it off at the elbow because I don't want to make that turn. I want it to start over and make a root going away and out from the tree. Now we have another one here that's coming back around. I'm going to go back up in here and cut it off from the root system because I don't want that. Now in here, I don't know what I've done, but if it's any elbows, I'm going to cut the elbows off. And when you look at the bottom of the taproot, well, we got choices here. So what I did was the one on the left, I cut this off. And as the taproot continued to come down and made the elbow, I cut the elbow off. Now on the right, this is what was planted. On this one, I know I left 6 leaves because eventually one of them came off. Now this was October the 27th, totally out of my comfort zone too, but I did it anyhow. I had the opportunity to get some of these and I said, I've got to do some things. I want to learn some things. So it's planted. Next spring, this is April the 3rd. This is that tree right there. It's grown very good. It's nice. It's got a good root system under it, even though I can't see it. But I'll tell you this, within a month, I will see that root system because I'm going to move it. This was out of my comfort zone. Okay. Now, let me tell you about Vivian. Vivian called me one day and she says, Herman, we got these citrus trees in these pots and they've been sitting out there for 2 years. Can we plant them? Well, sure you can, but describing this over the telephone is difficult. So I drive to Vivian's house and we washed all the soil off the roots, pruned them severely, planted them, and Vivian calls me one day and says, Herman, they're growing. And then at a later time, I go back and sure enough, they look good. Now, oh, I got to say one more thing here. There was a master gardener, there was a guy called me and he had these, he was looking for somebody to prune his pecan trees because somebody had come over and pruned one of his trees like they would an oak tree. So they must have cut it pretty severe. He called me and was looking for somebody to prune these trees. And I asked him, why are you pruning these trees? And he says, because I was told I have to do it every year. Then I tell him, no, you don't have to. Only if you have limbs that for some reason need to be removed, you go ahead and remove them. So the end result is he didn't have to worry about finding somebody to trim the tree. He didn't have to pay him to do it, and his trees still look good. So we saved him some money. Now, once your trees are planted, you want to remove all the wire stringer ropes where the tags were because these tags can girdle those trees later on. That girdle can stop the fluid flow. If it's a wide enough piece of girdle, it could kill the tree outright. Some cases, the bark will actually grow over that wire or whatever and continue to grow. I recommend photos and records because someday somebody's going to come out there and they're going to taste your fruit. They're going to love it. They're going to ask you what variety it is. And what are you going to tell them? Okay. Also, what rootstock it is. Now, when it comes to varieties on top of this tree, you need to keep some records. And let me explain why. Because someday when you have a problem, you're going to call the extension office and you're going to say, I have a problem with this, whatever. And we're going to ask, well, what variety is it? And the reason we do that is because certain varieties have certain problems. And by you supplying the variety, we may be able to help you a lot quicker or tell you that's a characteristic of the tree. Okay, we got tree damage. The variety of the tree is unknown, but mowers, tractors, rut, who knows? This tree's been damaged. Can I cut this out? Now, when I look at this, what would I do? I see a small limb coming out here and I don't have a good picture of the whole tree, but what I would do is probably just above this right here, I would cut this off at a slight angle so the moisture would roll off. Now, can I tie this so it would grow almost straight up? That's one choice. Another choice might be where I would cut this off about 1 inch or 2 from the tree. And right where that union is, a bud might come out and grow up. The only difference is years later, I will know where that slight change in the bark is, but most other people will not know, okay? I know, okay, when it comes to vehicle traffic, This pecan tree has vehicle traffic. There's a lot of foot work around it. When you dig water lines, you damage the roots. There's a lot of traffic around this tree. There was some soil added to the level one time. Normally, it's recommended that you only add 1 inch of soil per year to raise the level around your trees. Your feeder roots are about 1 inch below the surface of the ground. If you add too much soil, you may suffocate the roots. When the soil was added around this tree, I thought, that's too much soil. So I take a photograph. Every year I take a photograph. I do see decline in the top of the tree. Whether it will kill the tree or not, I do not know. And it may take a while to do this, and it's a shame. Now, on Highway 6, this is technically in Hitchcock. In 1964, the guy who had this orchard would go out pretty regular and around these trees would take a front end tiller and till down as deep as he could. And he was about 18 inches from the tree. I think his theory was, I'm going to make the feeder roots go down deep, but that doesn't work. Years later, the trees, they grew some, but not nearly what they should. The present owner is not tilling and they're beginning to grow some, but those feeder roots are important. So we want to protect them any way that we can. If you drive down Highway 6 on the north side, there'll be a 2-story house sitting way back off the road and a long drive. This is the place. When you plant your trees and you got somebody taking care of your yard for you, or maybe even you want to do something to protect it from the weed eater. Maybe a fence, a wire. Put something down there that when that weed eater hits it, it tears that weed eater up. But you want to protect the bark. The bark on these small trees is very, very thin, and one rap with a weed eater and it's dead. Are they going to replace your tree? The tree on the right is, I believe, a peach or something. But anyhow, what we want to talk about is in some of these parks and stuff, they build volcanoes around these trees, and a lot of this bark is covered with mulch and stuff. But there's a lot of moisture in there, and that moisture can do damage to your bark. We don't want that. So what we want to do is we want to keep this open so we have a very good airflow and we don't have any bark damage in there. Now, this tree is a tree in a neighborhood, and it's probably planted too shallow. It may have come out of a container, or it may have been moved in with what I call a spade truck. The smaller spade trucks can move trees up to about 5 inches in diameter. What they do is they go in and they dig the hole and they go get the tree that you want, and they come back and they set it in there. And when they set it in there and they leave, they don't tell you anything. But there's a very high probability that right around the edge here, there's a gap. And those trees are not going to cross that air gap. So that means we need sand or something, water it in to remove all of those air pockets. For years, I have been watching a magnolia tree that was transplanting with a truck. When it started, it was probably 18 or 20 feet tall. I see decline. It's maybe the foliage is probably 8 feet high in the tree now. The appearance is such to where if I wanted beauty, I would have to take the tree out because it just doesn't look real good at all. I want to say you might want to think out of the box. I know some of this is very drastic as far as somehow some people think of root systems and things. I want to remind you about the A&M planting guide, and look how large that hole is. And you might want to ask, do I really need that hole like that? I have had the opportunity to do some things that a lot of people haven't had the opportunity to do. on those peach trees, it's because they didn't cost anything. On some of that citrus, they were going to go to the by the wayside anyhow. So I had the opportunity to work with them. I've been fortunate to work with other master gardeners side by side, and they see what's happening because we need to educate. Okay. Now, I'm ready for questions. So thank you very much.